Good afternoon. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist here for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us for another installment of our Curators Conversations. Today, we're going to be looking at the life of a collection, and we have three of our staff members here with us today. But before we get started in that, I'd just like to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support and sponsoring these free programs that we get to put on, like our Curators Conversations, like our trivia night that we're hosting tomorrow night. If anybody's interested in some military trivia, I would like to see you come out for that. And many of our other virtual programs, those can all be found on our website, wisvetsmuseum.com. And you can certainly register from our museum site. So thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for providing their support for all this free programming, and in particular, their executive director, Ms. Jennifer Carlson. She does a fantastic job with the foundation. And if you want any more information on the foundation itself, you can always find that information on our website as well, to include how to become a member. So this afternoon, like I said, we're going to be talking about the life of a collection. And we have three of our, like I said, very talented staff members here with us today. We have Brittany Strobel, who is our processing archivist. We also have Mr. Russell Horton, who is our reference archivist. And then we also have Luke Sprague, who is our oral historian. They're going to be talking about the different ways that we collect and preserve all of our artifacts and our archival materials here at the museum. And they're going to be taking questions from everybody in the audience today. So like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those through the chat feature. And right now, what we're going to do is we're going to get off to the first question, and we're just going to have the staff members briefly talk about what they do here at the museum. So Brittany, we're going to start off with you. If you could just introduce yourself, your title, and just a brief description of what you do here at the museum, and then we'll roll on to Russ and then on to Luke.
Sure. My name is Brittany Strobel. I'm the processing archivist here at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. I'm currently at our State Archives Preservation Facility, or SAFE, in the storage room where we keep everything. You can see on the counter behind me boxes that we have out for exhibit preparation. What I do is pretty technical. I get to look at all the materials that are donated and catalog them online for people to use. We have an in-house and a web-facing database, which sounds pretty technical and maybe a little bit boring, but what I like to tell people that I get to do is I get to know people. I get to read people's letters and diaries and look at their personal photographs and tell the world about them, writing an abstract and adding more information to make them more findable. So when people ask me what I get to do, I like to say that I get to be really nosy and read letters and diaries and look at photographs and really get to know someone while they were serving.
Great, thank you, Brittany. Russ, we're going to move on to you.
Sure. So my name is Russ Horton. I am the reference and outreach archivist at the museum. That means mostly that I help researchers who are hoping to use our collections in some way. That ranges from genealogists through high school and college students, all the way through professional historians writing books. I help them answer questions and access our collections in a way that can help them do that. The outreach function of my title means that I try to, when it's safe, get out around the state and speak to different groups and spread the word about our museum and our collections and our resources. And in terms of today's topic, I guess, the life of a collection, I also handle donations. So I'm at the kind of the beginning of the life of a collection here.
Excellent, thank you, Russ. And last but not least, Mr. Luke Sprague, our oral historian.
Hello, my name is Luke Sprague, and I'm the oral historian of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. I basically gather the stories of the veterans. There could be oral, video, it could be just audio, and our process beginning speaking with the veteran and moving it all the way through to documenting their story, preserving their story, making it available to the public. So that's what I focus on.
Excellent, thanks, Luke. The first question today is basically kind of a softball question. What kind of things do we collect here at the museum, and what's the best way to go about donating any sort of artifacts or archival material to the museum?
Sure. So I can take that one if that's right with Luke and Brittany. So, this is Archives Month, which is why we're all archivists here. So I'll talk mostly about archival materials, but I can talk about objects a little bit if people are interested. We collect materials relating to Wisconsin veterans. That's kind of the first criteria, and it's one that we run into issues with sometimes. Sometimes, donors will contact us and they live in Wisconsin, but maybe the veteran whose materials they have never lived in Wisconsin. And when that's the case, unfortunately, we can't generally accept it. The veteran has to have been born in the state or entered the service from the state or served in a unit that was predominantly made of Wisconsin men and women, or lived in the state for at least 10 years. So we've tried to expand the definition of a Wisconsin veteran as wide as we can. I guess that's the first part in terms of what we collect is we have to collect materials from a Wisconsin veteran. If they do meet that criteria, we try to collect things that help us to tell their story. In terms of archives, paper type materials, most tend to be fairly unique and most tend to help us tell the story. So we generally accept most archival materials, letters and photographs and diaries and journals and military orders, maps and manuals and all those sorts of things are items that will help us tell that individual story. We believe that every veteran is a story, whether they served stateside or overseas, whether they served in wartime or peacetime, they have a story that's worth preserving and worth telling. So materials that can help us to tell that individual story, whether it's a menu from a Thanksgiving meal served in Boona in 1943, or a training manual from Truax Field from the 60s. Those are materials that are valuable to us. Eric, you can help me out here. Did that answer most of the question?
That answered the first part, Russ.
Okay.
If somebody out there had some materials that they would like to be considered for donation, what would be the first step in that process?
Sure. So the first step would be to contact us, either through our website. We do have a website page, donate materials, and that's the ideal way. That'll send an email to me. You can kind of describe what you have and obviously provide your contact info, and then I can look it over and get back in touch with people and speak further. Otherwise, you can call or email me directly. One thing I should note when we're talking about donations is a lot of times folks kind of assume that they know what we want, and that usually is a dress uniform or medals, and that might be what they associate with the veteran service, but sometimes they assume that we don't want things, particularly letters, it would seem, because they think, oh, they're just personal, they don't really talk about anything. But I do just want to put out there that we are very interested in materials that you might not think we would be interested in, just because they are unique and because they do help us to tell that story. So if you do have some things that you think we might want, I would encourage you, even before you contact us, to see what else you have, and to please don't assume that there are things that we don't want. But yeah, if you have some of those things, reach out to us through our website or through email or phone to me. That would be just great.
Awesome, Russ. And then the next question is that if somebody has some really great archival material or some really great artifacts from their family lineage, from the family's military history, but they're not quite ready to donate to the museum yet, and they want to keep it at home, so they can, talk about it with other family members and whatnot, what would be the best way for them to keep family photos and papers and artifacts at their home?
Brittany, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The biggest thing is trying to keep things as stable as possible. And right now I'm sitting in a room that's kept temperature and humidity controlled. So you want to keep things out of an area that's not a controlled environment, like attics and basements tend to be really dry or really wet or take big swings. So you want to keep things at as level as you can. This room is about 65 degrees, so it's pretty comfortable, a little chilly for people, but that's going to help keep things as stable as possible. And then you kind of want to look at the things that you have. Letters and photographs can be stored in folders that are upright, but if you have things like a scrapbook, it's probably actually best to lay it flat because that's not going to put strain on the binding that can often break. We often get scrapbooks where the binding has given way and all the pages are kind of everywhere, and we get to try to reconstruct that. So to keep that as whole as possible, you kind of want to look at what is the most stable way to put these things. You can never go wrong, I think, with laying something flat and putting it just in a flat box to try to keep the dust off of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Brittany. Got one for the oral historian in the house, Luke. Kind of along the same lines of, keeping stuff at home versus donating stuff to a museum or a professional organization. If people are trying to do some kind of oral history on their family at home, what is the difference between a memoir and an oral history?
So yeah, these are two forms of types of histories that we collect. They're two different things, really. A memoir is what you want me to know about you. It's you talking about you generally, or to your family. Whereas an oral history interview is fresh content with researched questions, asking you things that you might not expect. So we're asking you to get a reaction to your experience at a particular place or your experience in dealing with something. And generally, it's a controlled environment and you're looking to get reactions from that person. And the person who's interviewing you generally may not be your family member. It may be somebody else. So your reaction to them asking questions will be different. So memoir is one thing, has value, goes over here. Oral history is a different thing, it goes over here.
Thanks, Luke. What is the hardest thing you think it is about your job in particular, Luke? As far as getting the oral histories, getting people to recognize that they can come in and give these oral histories or have people come out and speak to them. Is there a lot of interest in that? Or do you feel that you have to really go out into the public and let everybody know that we are here to provide this service?
Well, great question. That's a multi-part question. So I'll try to answer the first part and then the second part. The first part was, what is the most difficult part of my job? I think that was your question.
Well, I mean, just as far as educating the general public on the fact that we do offer this service. I don't know if a lot of people know that there is this oral history service and that we are looking constantly to get these stories down before we no longer have these stories.
Yeah, so we do try to let people know as much as we can. And when we do have opportunities where we have leads come in from either staff members or the general public, we pursue them very aggressively and try to get that veteran, if they're interested, to talk. What's interesting is it's kind of an art form, because even someone who's expressed interest in the program, as you bring them in, they may decide they do want to talk or they don't want to talk with us. The other thing that happens is they may have objects or photographs that they want to donate. So generally, we'll bring either Russ or Brittany in on the conversation and say, okay, this person is thinking about this. So yeah, I think we have pretty good exposure. I think we have plenty of intake coming in. I think the issue is always moving through and getting them documented. And like you had said, these stories are ephemeral. They do go away, just like the objects, just like the archival collections. Within that, first generation, it goes away if we don't take care of it and get it documented.
And then lastly, Luke, are all the oral histories transcribed?
No, no. We have a substantial number that need to be completed yet, and that's an ongoing project. And it takes a substantial commitment by the staff to complete those. We are always looking for volunteers and people to help us out with those, because that is one form of access to the public, is transcription.
Is the collection, and I think this might go more to Brittany and Russ, is the collection of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum digitized yet?
No. For a variety of reasons, it's not yet. Mostly time. Everything takes time, and we don't have the storage capacity to completely digitize everything. We started with our photographs, which are things that will decay over time, and we focused on things that would be going to our cold storage that take time to get back out if someone wants to see it, and then Civil War photographs, because those are in high demand and are often very delicate. And then from there, we triaged out things that are frequently accessed, and we started digitizing that way. We did start scanning some of our papers as well, again, focusing on the Civil War, since while that paper is usually relatively stable, that ink is not. So to try to preserve things as best we can. We are actively digitizing. We're constantly scanning things. If we have to dismantle scrapbooks, we scan the scrapbook in its entirety first, so that original order is captured. But at the moment, there's no plans to completely digitize the collection. That would be a lot of work.
Yeah, I'll chime in there too. I think I get this question a lot from researchers who contact us and have found that we have a diary that they're interested in, or they find that we have a collection of letters that they would like to see, and they often ask, like, are these digitized? Can I see them online? And just to reiterate what Brittany said, it's not feasible in so many ways, and it would be lovely if we could. It would be awesome if we could digitize everything that we have, and if we could, I'm sure we would. But there's so much that goes into it. All the stuff that Brittany said. I mean, if you even think about, what I tell people a lot is, if you think about a computer that you had 5 years ago and the information that you saved onto that computer, the likelihood that that information is going to still be accessible on the next computer you buy, or 2 computers you buy down the road, is pretty low. When we scan all this stuff, when we digitize it, we not only have to go through all of the work and the labor and the time that goes into that, but we also have to maintain those digital files and you know, migrate them through different data systems and all that stuff. So there's a lot of work and expense and time that goes into it, that it just, we really try to focus on preserving the originals first, so that they will be around for generations, and then kind of digitize as we're able. And oh, Luke raised his hand. Go ahead, Luke.
Oh, didn't mean to interrupt you, Russ.
Oh.
I was just going to dovetail with what Russ and Brittany said. It's always a process for us. Russ is exactly right, and Brittany's right. It's a staggering amount of material, and then to digitize it, and then you're moving it between different media carriers as you're trying to maintain the quality of what you have. It's a real art form. So there's a lot out there to do.
Yeah, but all that being said, even if it's not digitized, it doesn't mean that it's not accessible. It's still absolutely accessible through our catalog and through our staff. I help researchers from all over the country and even all over the world. We get questions from England and Japan and Germany, folks who, there's no way that they can come here. It's just not feasible, but we are able to kind of what we call scan on demand. If someone from Europe wants a copy of a diary that's not digitized, I can, or Brittany can scan it on demand and get it to them that way. It might not be scanned in the way that we would normally do it for preservation, but it's kind of a quick scan that makes it accessible to the researcher. And oh, Brittany, yeah.
If we get a lot of those, we tend to then make that archival scans to try to alleviate some of the stress on the collection from being pulled and taken out and scanned and laid flat and all of that as well. So if we get a lot of requests for the same collection, we might go through that collection and say that one's a priority. it's getting accessed really frequently. And to better preserve the originals, we're going to create digital copies for people to send out or to look at in-house as well.
Yeah. And Eric, I'm sorry that we're going to keep going here. This is really the question that keeps on giving. Another thing that this brings to mind for me in terms of dealing with researchers is I think it's really important for the folks who are on today and for you to tell your friends too that in this age of the internet and a lot of things being digitized, it's super important from a researching perspective that you do not limit your research to only the things that you can find online. We've just spent a lot of time talking about why we as an institution do not necessarily have everything digitized, but we're not the only ones. You know, there are museums and archives and libraries all over the country and all over the world who don't have things digitized. And I've been starting to run into a lot more researchers who look at who will do an online search, and if they don't find what they're looking for online, they just assume it doesn't exist. So please continue to contact museums and, hey, this is something I'm looking for. I didn't see it on your website. Is it something that you have? And then we can help you and say, look, we absolutely have a lot of that material. It's not been digitized yet, but how can we best get this to you? Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say on that question.
This is your forum, Russ. So if you guys need to talk about something in detail, please do. You know, the more information we can get, the more educated we'll all be as far as this goes. We talked a little bit at the beginning about where someone might go, particularly our website, to find out how to donate, who to contact, and those initial steps. But can you guys talk about the process itself? Once someone fills out that initial donation form and sends it in, what happens after that? What kind of steps are taken here at the museum before we actually get our hands on the materials that we're looking for?
I can start out with this one at least, and if you guys want to add in later. So when I get an email, either through our website or just from a person that says I have some materials I'd like to donate, it just kind of usually the next step is me contacting them, getting in touch with them either by email or by phone, and just asking a bunch of questions like establishing that the veteran is from Wisconsin, and then usually finding out what materials you do have. Again, people often will contact us and say, I have a dress uniform from my father, do you want it? And then I'll follow up with, well, we'd love to see it. Do you have other materials from your father? Maybe some letters or some photographs, and we kind of go from there. Once we have a feel for what you have, what you're thinking of donating, I can often kind of check on the side with our curators and with our other staff and find out if we are able to accept all of the things. Unfortunately, we are not able to accept everything that's offered to us that is from a Wisconsin veteran. Arguably speaking, in terms of papers, we usually can, but for a variety of reasons, when it comes to three-dimensional objects, we can't always take everything. So I often will try to work with the donor to explain some of that and kind of arrive at a list of the materials that we're likely to accept. Then we set up a donation meeting, and obviously that's a little more complicated right now with COVID, but a lot of folks will mail things into us. If they're not able to mail things in, we have been starting to set up appointments, in-person donation appointments at our preservation facility where Brittany is right now. It's a little more spacious. Frankly, it's easier to get to than downtown Madison, sometimes where the museum is. So I've done a couple of those already. They've gone well. We take in materials on what's called a temporary receipt. It means that we are temporarily accepting the materials so that our staff can look over them a little closer, do a little bit of research, maybe compare to similar items that we already have in our collection. About once in good times, once a month. In the current times, maybe once every other month, maybe even a little bit less frequently than that, we have a collection committee meeting where our collection staff get together and we review all of the materials that have been donated on temporary receipts since our last meeting. Usually the person who brought the donation in will kind of present. They've done research on the veteran, they've done research on the items that have been donated, and then the collection committee as a whole votes on whether or not to accept the materials. Materials that are accepted are put into our permanent collection once a certificate of gift gets signed and returned. Materials that we choose not to accept for a variety of reasons are always first offered back to the donor. Sometimes the donors don't particularly want them back. And if that's the case, we can often try to offer them to another institution or find another use for them, maybe in our educational collection or something like that. I did see the question in our chat room that said, what's the process from start to on display? And I think that's a common misconception that I just want to quickly address. I think the latest figure I heard was we have about 3% of our collection on display at any given time. So that means that 97% of our collection is not on display. Sometimes that disappoints people. They sort of hope that what they're donating is going to be put on exhibit right away. And I can totally understand that. From our perspective, we just don't have the space to put everything. Literally, we don't have the space to put everything we have on display. But again, kind of like I said with the digitization question, it does not mean that it's not accessible. It does mean that it is being preserved to our fullest ability, that it will be around, that it is available for future exhibits. We do change our exhibits out. We have temporary exhibits, we have traveling exhibits. It's available for all of that. We have a very active social media presence that, frankly, you know, more people can see things when they're online than come into our building physically. So a lot of things get featured on our Facebook page or Twitter account, and we help spread the story that way. So I do want to make that very clear, and I do make that clear for donors when they contact us, that unfortunately there's no way we can guarantee that objects that are donated will be put on display, but we can guarantee that we will preserve it, that we will make it accessible to the family moving forward. The family will always know where it is and will be able to access it when they want. And it also becomes accessible to researchers. So I think that goes through most of the process there. Anyone want to add anything?
I'll hop in here. So the oral history process follows a lot of the same general rules. We approach things slightly different. We get people who are interested. It could be from objects or individually. We let them know about the program, first of all. We give them more information. We explain the process to them. And then we come back to them and we say, okay, is this something that interests you? And if they are, generally we'll go ahead with what's called a pre-interview phone call. And we'll kind of flesh some of that initial information out. That tells us a little bit more about the veteran without actually starting the interview. Once we've done the pre-interview phone call and we've committed to doing an interview with that veteran, which generally we almost always do, we will then do more research and build the interview guide, which we have a structured interview guide at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And we will flesh out that structure, which is a chronological, topological structure with additional questions for that specific veteran. So we're asking them relevant questions about their military career and things that happened in their life. Once we've done that, we'll conduct the interview. Following the interview, we'll have them sign a deed of gift, and where we sign over the interview to the museum. And then we'll begin the preservation process immediately after that, where we're uploading the materials to the preservation drive. We're creating backup CDs. We're doing all those processes. We're also sending a thank you note to the narrator. We're finishing up that agreement. If we have any questions of the narrator, we'll ask them then. And basically trying to wrap that process up. And then there's a whole series of post-interview processes that we go through to make that interview available. And I think we'll stop right there because it's a pretty extensive list.
Brittany, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I guess the thing that I would add is Russ is right. What you can see online, most of our collection, especially for the objects, is available through our website. But as far as exhibit goes, some things we can't responsibly exhibit. They're too fragile, they're too delicate, they won't respond well. It would cause them to decay at a much faster rate. So part of that is us being responsible historians and saying, we would love to put this on exhibit. We're going to try to figure out a way to share it with the world, usually through social media, sometimes through articles in our Bugle and other publications. It's really about being responsible historians and trying to make sure that material exists for as long as possible.
Excellent. If somebody does donate some of their family's artifacts or archival materials to the museum and it doesn't get put on display, like Russ said, I think he said he had 3% of our total collection that can get put on display. Are the family members still allowed to come to the museum and see the collection that they donated or the artifacts that they donated?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make, and I think it's a good selling point, if nothing else. When materials are kept in the family, they're really only accessible to the family, and frankly, I've experienced this in my own family. They tend to get dispersed. Someone wants to see the letters, and then no one can remember where they are anymore. They tend to get lost, and frankly, we have found that within 3 generations, they tend to get thrown away. Someone finds a box of letters when they're cleaning out their parents' house, and they think, I don't know what these are. I don't even know who this is from, and they get destroyed. When things are donated to the museum, in addition to all of the other services that we offer in terms of preservation and making them accessible to other researchers, it's a service for the family. We are keeping these materials in one place. They're not going to be dispersed amongst 18 aunts and uncles. They are going to absolutely be accessible to the family, and we do that regularly. We actually have a family, a World War I nurse, Amy O'Keefe Kinney, and her daughter just passed away in the last 5 years, but I would say almost annually, her daughter and her granddaughters and her great-granddaughters would come in once a year to kind of look at the collection and see it, read the letters, look at the photographs. It's absolutely a service that we offer to the family to preserve these materials for the family, for generations to come. I mean, Brittany works really hard on cataloging these and getting them onto WorldCat, which is a national library database. And that means that they can become accessible to family who didn't even know they existed. Someone who just puts in a name on Google or in a library catalog can find that these materials are at our museum that they, again, might not have known ever even existed, and they can access them that way. So providing the service to a family is very much forefront in our minds with this.
What I would add to that is it is by appointment only, since we do have 2 locations. Some of your items that you donated might be here at the State Archives Preservation Facility, and some might be down the street at 30 West Mifflin. So we are definitely welcome, but we do need an appointment so that we can make sure all of your materials are there when you show up. We do like to show off for the family how we keep the veterans materials. We like to roll out the red carpet when we can, and definitely let you back into your family's story and show you how we've preserved it to make sure it stays in the world for as long as possible.
Thank you, Brittany. That's a really, really good point. And we don't want to have any disappointed people who show up at the museum and are hoping to see their ancestor stuff. Like Brittany said, it might not even be at the museum. It might be physically somewhere else. So please do call ahead. And I did see someone else asked a question about how COVID has impacted availability to researchers and the public. And I think this kind of wraps in with this. So if it's okay, I'll just address that right away. We do, I mean, even before COVID, because of the preservation facility, because most of our materials are stored out there now, we had moved to an appointment only process for researchers. researchers can contact us and make an appointment, and we'll just make sure the materials are where they need to be. If they're just looking at a single box, we can move that box back to the museum and handle it there. But if they want to look at a whole bunch of materials, sometimes it's easier to have them meet us out at the safe and just do the research right out there. With COVID now, in that sense, it hasn't changed a whole lot. You still need to make an appointment. I just had a researcher in last week who was able to access materials at the safe. You know, there are different safety precautions that are in place. You have to use a mask. We're in a state building, so masks are required. We are keeping social distancing. There's hand sanitizer, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of access to collections, it's still by appointment, but we are wanting to help as much as we can. I would say with COVID, I've been trying maybe a little harder to help via scans, or you know, if someone wants to know if a letter collection mentions a certain thing, maybe I'll scan through the letters and see if it mentions that, instead of just making an appointment for the researcher to come do that him or herself. But we are trying as hard as we can to keep these collections accessible to the public during this time.
Yeah, I'd like to hop in here. I agree with Russ. I think really, if you let us know what you're looking for and give us enough time, we'll get what you're looking for pretty quickly. In fact, our response time and our ability to provide these materials as we are, including the oral histories, collection, video content, whatever it is, if it's not restricted in some shape or form, we're going to try to get it to you as quickly as possible or in a reasonable time. That doesn't apply necessarily to an object or a photograph, but if it's digitized and it's available electronically and it's not locked down for some reason, we're going to try to follow up with you pretty quick. So I wouldn't look at that, and I think, yeah, it's affected, but not a whole lot for the oral history collection, not a whole ton. I want to take the second question here on the chat. We do outreach to DAV, VFW, and other veterans organizations, and other organizations that are not necessarily associated with veterans. So to answer that question from Billy X, we do talk to those organizations, absolutely. Some of us are actually involved in those organizations regularly.
Great, thanks, Luke. And then Russ, you mentioned it a couple different times during this talk so far, and we did get the question, your scan on demand process, is there a charge for that? And if so, how much is that?
I was going to make a funny answer and say we accept interesting offers, but that's not true. So for scan on demand, you know, if it's a page or two, we're not going to charge anything, but if it's more than a few pages, our general policy is that we charge kind of a $10 service fee, and then it's 25 cents a page. So, but we're not in this to make money. We're kind of in it to cover our costs with paper or the scanner and staff time and things like that. So sometimes people come to us. I mean, my gosh, I had a researcher, this was years ago. He was researching the Tuscania, which was a World War I troop ship that was sunk off the coast of Ireland, with a bunch of Wisconsin troops on it. And we have a collection from Edward Lauer, who was on the ship. And he collected, my gosh, I think we have like 32 boxes of materials from Edward Lauer. And this researcher basically wanted it all. And he was unable to visit the museum for health reasons. So over the course of, I think, 2 years, I scanned the greater part of the Edward Lauer collection, and it would have been immensely cost prohibitive. But you know, we're willing to work with folks if there's a case like that, or if it's just too much material. We want to share this material. The reason we're preserving it is so that we can share it. So if cost is an issue, talk to us. But yeah, the basic rule is $10 service fee plus 25 cents a page.
And just to add to that, if you are the veteran who donated or you are the donor, we do not charge you if you request copies of your materials that you donated here.
Excellent. Luke, this next question goes to you. And this person wants to know, what is the best way to search the oral history collection?
So the best way to search the oral history collection is if you go to the, on our website, there's oral histories, and then there's search the collection button, which takes you to our past perfect interface. Put in your name, who you're looking for there. That's one way to do it. That'll bring them up. Also put in your keywords there. That'll also work. The second way to do it is to go out to wisvetsmuseum.worldcat.org, which is what Brittany and Russ were talking about earlier, which is our WorldCat collection that's limited to just the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, as I understand it. And then if we have that veteran in there, type in his or her name and it'll pop. Type in oral history and then usually the person's surname, comma, first name. If we have it in the collection, it will not only bring up the oral history, it'll bring up if we have archival documents, if we have photographs, if we have objects. I don't know about objects, but definitely archival materials.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. We are starting to get a little low on time here. And I just wanted to sound each one of you out and just ask you, what do you wish people knew about, how families should collect and maintain their home collections if they're not ready to go to a museum yet? I'm sure that you guys get collections that come in all the time, and you look at it and you say, oh, if you had done this, 5 years ago or what have you, this would be in much better condition, so on and so forth. What kind of small suggestions would you have for everybody out there, and just how to better maintain their collections at home?
Number one thing is try to keep your materials together. People try to take letters out of envelopes and then donate both, and we try to go through and match things up, but it's a little easier if you leave those together for us. Like I said before, trying to keep them at a general level temperature and humidity level. You want it fairly cool and a little drier than most people would assume, just to try to keep that paper as stable as you can. I would say for my job, if you have identified photographs of your family member, if you would take that photograph and flip it over and in pencil on the back, pencil is very important, not ink, very gently write their name on it. It's heartbreaking to have a collection and it's from this person and you have all of these photographs and all of these people, but they never identified who any of them are. And when someone asks you for an image of that veteran, you have a best guess, maybe, hopefully, but identifying those photographs and keeping detailed notes about who is who in a collection can really help us when we're cataloging things to be able to better tell the story of, oh, this was my father's high school sweetheart who wrote him while he was serving. This was my mother's best friend who wrote them while they were in service. And it kind of helps us tie their story together better and better catalog things for sure.
I'll dovetail onto what Brittany said. If you've got magnetic media, make sure you're keeping it dry or drier, not wet. Make sure that it's in a relatively not too warm place, kind of cool, but not too hot. Usually an inside wall of a house or an apartment is good. Definitely communicate with other family members. Tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if you have anything that is on a CD or an audio tape, make sure if you're able to migrate that, if you can, to an archival grade type media carrier, which it's a big leap for some people, but it will help extend the lifespan of whatever you have. And also make people aware of where your materials are. So when you do pass on, if you do, or a family member does, they know, oh, I go here and there it is. And that conversation's occurred.
Yeah, and maybe even let them know like that when you pass, you would like the things to be donated. We get that a decent amount from donors too. Like, well, I can't give it up, but I'll make sure that my family knows that I want to donate it to you. And to be honest, we don't end up hearing from those families very much. So maybe get it in writing. But the thing that I would add, I guess, is if you're keeping the materials yourself, in addition to everything that Brittany and Luke said, I would encourage you to avoid the temptation to kind of self-curate the collection. I've talked to a lot of families who are donating things, and when I start talking to them about what we might be interested in, do you have this, do you have that, I often will hear, oh, we did have those, but we threw them away because we didn't think they were important. Or to be honest, there was a collection, or there was a family who eventually came to us, and they had their uncle's World War II materials, and their uncle was gay, and he discussed it in his letters, and they threw the letters away because they didn't want that to be known. And while you maybe can understand where they were coming from, that would be an incredibly important collection right now, and it's been lost because the family sort of decided we're going to self-curate this ourselves. So if you have materials that you're keeping, especially materials relating to a veteran, I kind of said this with the donation too, don't assume that you know what we might want or what might be important to scholarship in the future. That changes as well. Things that aren't so important now might be super important in the future. So I would encourage you to just kind of keep it all together and let a future museum or historian kind of figure out what might be worth keeping or not.
Yeah, the same thing applies to the oral history. I have a lot of veterans who say, oh, I didn't serve in combat. I didn't serve in wartime. Doesn't make any difference. We still want your story. There are a ton of fascinating stories and pieces of history, Cuban Missile Crisis, things that you don't expect that occurred historically that we have very little on that actually make really good pieces. So do call in, say, oh, I served from 1955 to 1957. It was peacetime. I was in Nebraska, but I was on a SAC Air Force base, and there you go. Take it from there. So all those stories are good.
Hey, Russ, I'm curious, does the museum have a way of tracking people who have, maybe collection pieces that might want in the future, but they're not ready to donate them yet? Do you ever have people come back and say, oh, contact us again in 5 years or something like that? Or does the museum have a way of tracking, people who have, maybe an interesting collection that we need to circle back around and contact them in the future to see if they're ready to give that up?
Yeah, I mean, so if we talk, I talk to folks who sometimes they'll call in and just tell me what they have, and they'll say, I'm not ready to donate this yet, but I'm just curious if it's valuable historically or whatever. And I feel them out, and if I get the sense, or if they say flat out, I'm not ready to give this up now, but I might be in the future, we'll definitely make a note to follow up with that person. But if they give no sign at all that they might someday want to donate it, then I'm not sure we always follow up with those folks. In terms of time and resources, it's not necessarily the most fruitful way to go about it. But really, I think the best thing we do for those terms is we're just trying to get the word out there. We're trying to get our name out and let folks know through programs like this what we can do and what we can provide to families. And we hope that through word of mouth and through people experiencing it themselves, that will make people aware and comfortable with preserving the materials through us.
Yeah, and we'll do a similar thing. We'll track your first contact with us, how many, if you're talking to us, if there's an ongoing conversation. Very often, sometimes it'll take months, even years, to get that oral history view to come in and come to fruition. It's not always as quick as people think it is. So, and that doesn't always have to do with how we're responding as a museum. Sometimes it's the veteran who may or may not be ready to talk about what they have on their mind. So we'll have that, and we'll be able to look back and go, okay, you talked to us 2 years ago. Okay, you ready to go? Okay, and go from there.
This last question is a little more on a personal note. And I got this question a couple different times through our education email. And people want to know what item in the collection has affected you or had an impact on you as a person and a historian the most. And also, sorry, Luke, through the oral history collection as well. I mean, is there a particular story that just really, has impacted you as a person?
My job in particular, I feel is very personal. Like I said earlier, I sit down with people's letters and diaries, and depending on the volume that people donate to us, that could be for months, just reading through all of the materials. And we truly sit down and we read through all of the materials just to get a better idea of who that person was. So, for some people it's volume. You have to donate all of their things for us to get a real concept of who they are. I don't know if any of you got the chance to see our temporary exhibit that was up when we closed, In My Spare Moments, the art of Harold F. Schmitz. Yvette Pino and I, who curated that exhibit together, she did most of the work. I helped her, I'll be honest. We both really got to know Harold very, very well. And you find yourself on a first name basis with somebody who you never even met. You might never have ever even been able to meet. They might have passed before, like for me, before I came to Madison, I never would have met that person. So a lot of the collections that I go through end up with a special place in my heart. And I like to talk about these people to try to get other people to get to know them as well, to go to our research center when we're open again and sit down and get to know a veteran by reading through their letters and diaries and getting to know them through the personal materials that families donate to us.
Yeah, I mean, I could give an easy answer, which would be my grandfather. I convinced my family to donate my grandfather's World War II letters to the museum. And that's something that obviously affects me deeply, but I used to process as well what Brittany's talking about, and I agree 100%. You feel like you get to know this person who may have lived 150 years ago, but one of the collections that affected me the most was a World War I nurse named Helen Belovsky. I processed her letters, and she wrote hundreds of letters home from Europe to her mom and her sisters, and you got such a feel for how alive she was, and she was excited to be in France and to visit Paris, and she was scared and horrified at being at an evacuation hospital treating muddy tents full of wounded men. And there are a few collections I've read that I have really just felt a connection with a person that closely, and just felt like I could know what she was experiencing and feeling, and it was pretty special. It is pretty special.
I think from my perspective, a lot when we're interviewing people, you have to form some form of connection. You have to build that relationship with them. Ideally, you've built some rapport with them in advance. And I can't, I don't have any one in particular that I think of. I think each of those veterans that I've interviewed, each affected me in their own particular way, because a lot of them have been through difficult times, have dealt with a lot of things, and they each have their own particular thing. And then usually what happens with an interview, I come out of that interview, it could be a Vietnam era vet, it could be a World War II vet, and there'll be some piece of that veteran that I go, oh, I learned from that, or I got this experience from that. And each one is different, and I don't know that I can put one as separate from the other. They're all different.
Well, guys, thanks so much for your time today. I'm sure that there's probably a whole deal more that we probably could have talked about, but we are limited to an hour. But you guys gave some great information today. I'm sure everybody out there has a good basis on how to donate to the museum now, if that's something they're considering, or if they're not, but they still have pieces at home, how to take care of those things at home. So I think all the information that we put out today was fantastic, and I'd just like to thank Brittany and Russ and Luke for their expertise and for taking their time today to talk to us about this. Thanks again, guys. And then before we go, I just want to kind of reiterate some of the things that Russ and Brittany and Luke were talking about, particularly Brittany, when she was saying that, you know, maybe not all of our collections are on display, but we do use our collections and our archival material in different ways, particularly through social media. And so if you can go to our Facebook page, which I will, our marketing director has already put that on there. So our Facebook link is listed on the chat board, and you can follow us on Facebook and see a lot of our social media posts that have to deal with our collection, maybe some of the things that don't get displayed but still have great stories behind them. And then as well, you can follow us on Twitter too. And we do the same type of social media outreach there as well, and on Instagram. So those links are being posted right now in the chat board, and you can follow us through those links. And then as well, I just want to let everybody know about our next upcoming curator conversation that will be happening on November 2nd. And we're going to be talking that day about Army aviation in Vietnam. We have one of our fantastic museum volunteers who was a Huey pilot in Vietnam, and he's going to be talking about his experiences over there. So that will be on November 2nd from 12 to 1. You can find that link on our website, and you can register for that program. And as well, we do have trivia night coming up tomorrow night. So if you're interested in that, again, you can find that link on our website and register for that as well. And then lastly, I just want to let everybody know that our cemetery tours have been completed. We are doing it virtually this year, and you can find those cemetery tours on madisoncemeterytours.com, or you can go through our website and follow the link there. We have a fantastic virtual tour for everybody this year. There's no charge at all. And so we'd like for everybody to who's going to miss being live and in person at the cemetery tours, follow that link and see what we put together there. You're going to be really impressed. And we have a lot of information about the cemetery that we haven't been able to put out in previous years. So we are taking this opportunity to really expand the information that we're getting out there for these tours this year. That's a lot to say with the mask on, but those are the signs of the times. I would like to thank everybody for showing up today. Your participation is greatly appreciated, and we hope to see you again for some of our upcoming events here at Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Thank you very much. And then lastly, Brittany, Luke, Russ, thank you guys for all your time today.